Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Nick Halaris Show. Our guest this week is Ben Kuethe Oaks, the Vice President and General Manager of Divert. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nick. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I've been really enjoying reading up about you and your company, watching your TED Talk, which I'll just give a plug. Everybody should listen to it as a follow-on to this episode. But you guys are up to some really interesting things and impactful things. And I thought the best place to start this is let's talk about Divert and the way in which you're, attempting to make the world a better place.
Yeah, we started our founders 17 years ago, and we're a circular economy company that's really out there to prevent food from being wasted. And, I think what does circular economy mean? How do we really talk about that in our terms? It's been a transformation. And I think early on, 17 years ago, our founders really focused on how do we eliminate food from going to the landfill? Landfills are like the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases, and food waste is the highest contributor to that. And so there's a lack of infrastructure to be able to solve for that across the US. There's a lot of disparate localized solutions, but nothing really done at scale. And so we started on that journey to tackle that problem very early on, to build sustainable infrastructure to be able to get wasted food out of the landfills. And through that journey, I think very early on, we identified, whoa, there's a lot more opportunity here to capture more value. And that's where we started to integrate our technology into our infrastructure to be able to help businesses reduce waste upfront and capture more of that edible food recovery, whether it be for transformation of some form or for donations. And that's really where we start to bake in this comprehensive circular solution that we've been out there really pushing for the last couple decades.
Yeah. And rewinding the clock 17 years ago, was the original idea to take this food and instead of having it go to the landfill to use it for biofuels or something like that? Was that the first idea?
Yeah, and it's been a journey, and even before I joined Divert, it started actually. We've always been commercially led, and I think that's been one of our strengths, is really looking at the problem not only from an environmental lens, but also how do we make this sustainable for our customers. And so we started with retail grocery and building on-site digestion technology to be able to convert that wasted food into renewable energy on site. It didn't work, too many moving parts, a lot of infrastructure and technology, and we've, morphed that into centralized facilities, our integrated diversion and energy facilities. But yes, anaerobic digestion technology, depackaging of wasted food to be able to get all of that out of the landfill has really been the solution and the idea from the start. And we believe anaerobic digestion for a lot of the commercial wasted food is the most scalable solution.
Yeah. We should zoom out for a second. I realize I probably should ask this first because I think the audience should know how crazy of a problem this is. And on your in your TED Talk and also on the Divert website, I heard some absolutely staggering numbers. Like I think 40% is the estimate for the amount of food that gets wasted in America, and like the average grocery store is producing 600 pounds a day of wasted food. Did I remember those numbers right?
Yeah, it's really hard to conceptualize. Even for myself, I've been doing this for a couple of decades, working in our food system and seeing this every day. Hard to wrap your head around. And when we look at it from even just as the United States, over 60 million tons of food is wasted annually. That it's an enormous number. And at the same time, we have 44 million people that are food insecure. So these are very integrated problems. We're wasting a lot of food, and we also have a lot of people that aren't able to get nutritious food on a daily basis. And zooming out as well, the way that I like to think about it is all of that unsold wasted food is also a economic impact. So that's over $200 billion of food that is grown, transported, stocked on shelves that doesn't feed people. And so it's a multifaceted problem, and I think is one that, from a climate perspective as well as an economic perspective and social, is touching all of those points.
Yeah, it seems like an unbelievable economic problem and opportunity at the same time, because if you were to look at another industry that produces mass consumer goods, like they would never tolerate that level of wastage, right? Like that they would be out of business in a very short order, right? If 40% of iPhones didn't make it to a consumer.
Right.
And at the end of all this, like if you take it all the way back to the origins of the supply chain, we're talking about farmers who have been struggling. My last this happened to work out. My last podcast guest was a Iowa farmer, seventh generation Iowa farmer, who's working on some technology to help farmers sort of take advantage of federal subsidies and the ethanol game and all that. And so we talked a lot about how hard it is for farmers to make money, and it makes sense. Yeah, 40% of the stuff you're making just gets trashed. Like that's a huge missed opportunity for someone to take advantage of.
Yeah, and it's also, when you look at the full supply chain or full food system, it's the people and businesses at the beginning, the farmers, and the people at the end, at home, that are really feeling the biggest impact. Inflation and food prices, and then
Yeah.
you've got farmers barely making it by. We have subsidized food that's really driving a lot of this stuff, and so we have the production, and there's a lot of just gray areas that and transparency that is hard to manage. And this is perishable food, so it's a lot different than if you're Amazon and managing packages. It's very different. So there's like an intrinsic level of shrink or waste that I think is just built in. And we looked at it the same way. We're like, this is ridiculous. How there is a lot of opportunity here to reduce that, and support businesses as well as communities, as well as our planet.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to come back and ask about how we got to this moment where such a huge percentage. But before we do that, let's close the loop on the different business lines that Divert has. So it sounds like the original idea was, hey, let's try to divert some of this stuff from the landfill and use it for power generation. But what else are you all up to?
That is something that is at the forefront of what we're continuing to scale. So we're on the path to building 30 facilities across the US. So essentially, we'll be within 100 miles of 80% of the US population. That's first and foremost. We want to scale that infrastructure to remove as much waste food from landfills as possible. And then there's those other points that we've integrated into our platform, which is really more data technology driven. And we've outfitted all these facilities with our IoT platform, where we're able to gather more information. So we've built this infrastructure with that in mind. So we are able to collect unsold food from retail grocers all around the country, whether it be Kroger, Albertsons, Target, some major retailers, and offer them a solution where it's their whole products. So if you've got a clamshell of strawberries, you're not just dumping those strawberries in. You can put the whole package in. What that allows us to do is to better understand what's really happening here. Why is food being wasted? What are the root causes? And how do we start to inform retailers and provide them with better insights to prevent waste in the future? So I look at it as a diversion journey. Like, first and foremost, let's get all of this stuff out of the black box of your trash compactors or your dumpsters out back, because you lose complete visibility. Then we can start to optimize and reduce your waste and start to inform you with better practices on merchandising and ordering and inventory management. And after that, start to look at where are there ways, I always think, like, put myself in the shoes of a person that's a produce associate that's pulling products from the shelf. You have to make those decisions in real time of, okay, am I going to mark this product down and discount it? Am I going to donate it? Am I going to put it in the divert bin? And we're helping them understand how well people are making those decisions and empower those people to do that better. And that's with partnerships like Feeding America, where we can leverage our data streams to build more powerful insights. So it's the new infrastructure on the back end that is scalable and allows us to, have a pretty significant environmental impact and reduce the carbon footprint. And then over time, we're continuing to build these data sets and databases to inform retailers and other businesses on how they can prevent waste.
Right. Okay, because there's like sort of three opportunities, right? Like there's preventing the retailer from overstocking or maybe buying the wrong mix of things. Like if 40% is going to get wasted, there's probably some of that. And then there's these 45 million food insecure Americans where, man, if you could figure out how to take some of this food that's usable and get it into their hands, that's a huge win. And then there's the power / climate change opportunity or climate economy. Yeah.
And that's exactly, when we say, when it's on our website, prevent, provide, power, like all three of those we're tackling, and really the only company that's kind of looking at them holistically, and is best positioned to do it because we manage more unsold food from grocers and retail facing businesses than anyone in the US. So it's hard because I always, when we think about the grocer, we spend so much time with our customers. It is complex. It seems like, oh, these are easy decisions, but it is perishable food. And so getting it in the right hands, making the right decisions, you have seasonality of things. So how do you manage that, and different inventory, supply and demand? So
Yeah.
I think getting smarter is really what, we're trying to help them do over time.
Yeah. I was thinking about this a lot over the weekend, just preparing for this interview, and just at restaurants and even in our own house. Like we actually throw a lot of food out too.
Mm-hmm.
And so my question is your 40% number, that big, like here's how much we think is wasted, does that include the stuff that I'm throwing in my trash and the restaurants are dumping as well?
It does. Yeah. When we look at it for that 63 million tons I mentioned in the US, about half of that is you and me and everyone at home, the consumers. And so consumers are a big part of that problem. Now, also one of the hardest to solve because, just the massive scale and the end use. Now we're at the very end of that. So we really, went upstream to the retail facing businesses, which, is about 20% when we think about restaurants and grocers. They're about 20% of that. And that's really where we focus because it's consolidated. There's a lot of food all going to these centralized locations that then get distributed out to people. But we need solutions that kind of tackle all components. And I think as we build our infrastructure and are within that, that population radius in these densely populated areas, we will be able to offer that to smaller businesses and restaurants and communities that we are able to serve. But we're building that base with retail and industrial manufacturing to make these viable facilities.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's really no difference between the food that I'm throwing out and the food that grocery stores throwing out from the standpoint of like, can it be used in the power side of your business, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot of compost, local composting that's going on that is helping to bridge a lot of that gap in our communities, which I think is a very important thing. When we look at it, it's the larger commercial entities that is really hard to solve for, that we are starting with.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to ask you. Like here, I live in West Hollywood, which is one of the smaller cities. It's kind of in the middle of Los Angeles. Los Angeles is this crazy political setup where there's the big city and then there's LA County, and LA County is actually 88 smaller cities. And so even some famous places that people hear about, like Beverly Hills and Santa Monica, like those are actually separate cities. And West Hollywood is one of them. And they passed an ordinance several years ago where they're making restaurants have separate bins for the food waste, and then also trying to get households to use a different bin for their organic waste as well.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on with that? Is that a good policy? And what are they doing with it, the material?
Yeah, I mean, like any good policy, I think there's got to be collaboration on the solution side, and as well as the generator. It can't be done in a black box. And so we have a lot of involvement and in California. Our first integrated facility went online in Northern California just this past year, and is really what we'll be replicating across the country. But a big part of what's driving that as well, there's the corporate and the environmental aspects and ESG goals that are really out there pushing some of these initiatives, but is the California State Senate bill SB 1383, which is the mandate where wasted food can't be put in the landfill. And that's kind of in tiers. So it started with larger generators like supermarkets and food manufacturing, and it kind of goes down all the way to the household level. And it's up to the different jurisdictions, so like West Hollywood or whatnot, to enforce and kind of implement those. And what takes time is getting the infrastructure to have an outlet. Okay, great. We implement those, but where are we going to take this? Is it, are there compost facilities? Are there anaerobic digesters? Are there companies like Divert where we can leverage their infrastructure? And I think that's where we're in these, I'll call them growing pains, but I think it's just progress in the state. And I think it is revolutionary in terms of what California is doing. And I think, we see Washington just followed suit with their House bill, as well as like Maryland and some other states. So it's not going to come without these, kind of like growing pains of, is there infrastructure to support the policies? Is there the network of companies to do this? And, kind of piecing all that together. But we have been very supportive and work collaboratively with, Cal Recycle and the state to help implement this stuff and understand where does, the food recovery aspect come into this as well. Not only, the recycling part, but how do we capture more edible food in the process? So,
yeah,
it's going to come with some challenges, but we think it's going to be great progress for, us as a whole.
Nice. And the composting, like from I guess from an environmental science standpoint, like, is composting just as bad as landfill? Does it produce methane? Like, or is there a difference between the two? Because it seems like it's the same thing, right? You're putting a bunch of organic material in the ground and letting it sit there. So what's the difference between those two things?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a compost expert, but it is there are a lot of benefits to it. It's when we look at open windrow, or there's different technology for composting, but you are capturing a lot of that carbon and nutrients, and you're breaking down the pathogens and whatnot. So it's a kind of this recipe of carbon and nitrogen to really be able to mitigate the methane being released. And so where you're not going to have that in landfills. And I think where we've taken it is kind of that step further, where, in compost, you're now creating a soil amendment to be able to capture those nutrients and grow future crops or, flowers or whatnot in communities, garden beds. When we look at our technology and anaerobic digestion, kind of, zooming out, I guess, for the audience on what that really is and what that technology, because I look at it as it's a giant stomach, so enclosed stomach. And so we have technology where we're capturing the methane, and it's a biological process. So there's bugs and so bacteria that are breaking down the unsold or wasted food. And then we're able to capture the methane, process that, clean it, and turn it into renewable energy. And then we're also stripping the nutrients from the solids and liquids that settled. So we're capturing nitrogen that we're able to use that as fertilizer. We're capturing the digestate that we can use that as a soil amendment. So we're stripping out even more, and we're kind of solving two major problems. One is, the impact of landfills, and then the impact of our fossil fuel and energy infrastructure. And so that's why when we look at anaerobic digestion and our technology and what we're doing, much larger investment, but the return on that and what we're able to do from an offset and from an environmental and a sustainability and the scale, with our footprint in terms of from a geographical perspective and where we can site these is much closer to the population density. And that's why we've, have the funding and the team to be able to scale this across the country.
To try to build these 30 facilities. Yeah. And the methane, so the methane that you capture, is that just get burned like any traditional natural gas? or how does it get turned into power?
So we will process that and clean it and then compress it and tie it directly into our existing natural gas pipeline. So it's carbon negative renewable energy, renewable natural gas that is generated from wasted food instead
Yeah.
of fossil fuels. And so that's where, when we think about this energy transition, and the circular economy, how do we start to leverage our existing infrastructure and not have to build, new systems, but be able to start to transition to more of a carbon negative and decarbonize the energy infrastructure. And that's where, it's exciting because you're bridging that gap, and really having an impact right away, being able to insert that directly into the pipeline.
Yeah. Interesting. And I'm no climate science expert, but my understanding on the gas, so the reason people don't like gas traditionally, natural gas, is that it's a byproduct of drilling for oil, right? Is that it? Because once you burn natural gas, doesn't it burns like clean relative to other things like coal and oil?
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's still the oil and gas companies that are fracking for natural gas, and I think it's that process is still a fossil fuel. It's not a
Yeah.
renewable source of energy. So we have this massive infrastructure all across North America, Canada, United States, Mexico, that leverages natural gas. So how do we leverage our technology and infrastructure to be able to decarbonize that? There's nothing that's going to be convert that overnight to wind, nuclear, solar, these more renewable sources. So we need to be. It's a suite. It's a portfolio that we need to kind of look at on a more macro level, and we're playing a part in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you captured it all, like just a hypothetical question, like let's say you got all of the 60 million tons into one of your facilities, how much power are we talking about?
That's a great question. I don't have that off the top of my head. But when we look at one of our facilities, we process about 120,000 tons of wasted food each year. And that's nearly, 225,000 MMBTUs of renewable natural gas. And, conceptualizing that of, well, what does that mean in terms of number of homes? That's about removing roughly 26,000 gas powered cars from the road each year.
Okay. So it's
So trying to put it,
significant.
yeah, it's significant.
It's
And
significant. Yeah.
scaling that to 30,
Yeah.
um, it'll have an impact.
Absolutely. Fascinating. So I want to zoom out and get back to what we were talking about with the scale and just discuss a little bit like how did we get here? How did America get to a place? Because I presumably, I mean, it's probably hard to get data on this, but presumably like 100 years ago, we weren't wasting this much food just because the supply chain wasn't what it is today, where we're eating whatever we want at any season from anywhere. So I feel like food was probably much more local, but walk me through how we got to this moment.
It's a complex problem. I think it's why it's one of the quote unquote wicked problems, when we think about climate and food insecurity in our food system. Um, and it's something that I'm just personally fascinated by. Very passionate about food and how it's grown and distributed and how we eat it. But it's been an evolution, and I think that's kind of, you hit on one of the things, is we were hyper local. We didn't have these massive um, transportation and distribution networks and this massive supply chain that had its pros and positives and has driven growth in our in our country and across the world, is building this network of distribution and supply of food. um, but it's hard to see what the consequences are as that's being built until you kind of are breaking down the problem and understanding, okay, that served us at some point, and it actually has been a very positive thing for us as a country, for growth and the economy. But how do we start to refine it now, and how do we make those tweak it? And I think we went, um, you know as we looked at the progression post you know world wars, of like people coming back and building more communities and suburbs and starting to sprawl in terms of our reach. Now you have processed foods being developed. You've got farm subsidies. You've got these distribution centers that are servicing all of the suburban areas that maybe would have been farms before and very localized. So what comes with that is the inefficiencies that I think we're seeing, and that's where baking in and starting to implement more of a circular economy model for our food system is going to be really important, because the kind of make, take, and dispose linear model is pretty detrimental when it comes to food, and it has an environmental impact, and then also leaves millions and millions of people without food.
Yeah. So on this idea of the circular economy, are you all advocating for significant regulatory changes in the food supply chain, or is it something else?
I mean, in terms of like upstream, like how food is produced,
Yeah.
there's a lot of push on that end as well, in terms of the
Yeah.
packaging that is used, the transparency in terms of how food is produced and distributed. Um, where we really focus is supporting the businesses on how do they capture the most value from that food that is already at their location, and then making business decisions, and not relying as much on the regulatory factors. Like, this is good for business. And yeah, I always say sustainability isn't sustainability unless there's an economic and a financial incentive as well. So how do we start to really bake that in? So we really focus on, um, the regulatory drivers help this, and we are lobbying and working with a lot of the states to be able to promote those efforts. But it is not the sole reason, and the sole driver to getting this done. And I think that we've been able to prove that with a lot of our customers, where we're moving into areas and parts of the country where it's not mandated. Trash might be cheap, but I think everyone is seeing that the landfill capacity is diminishing. I mean, existing capacity, we're 10 years from that, from reaching full capacity. So we got to find alternative solutions.
Oh, really? I never realized that was a constraint as well. And these
Yeah,
are like permitted landfills, like
right.
without making new ones. Obviously, we were running out of space.
Yeah, and I think unless people want to build more landfills, I don't think any of us want to do that. We have to have a solution to manage this waste, and food is a big part of that. So how do we remove that component to kind of slow this down, and then figure out all other circular solutions to manage plastics, refurbish. I think there's a lot of examples of that are being applied in a circular way, whether it be in the fashion industry or in the automotive industry, that we're starting to see to um, reduce the amount of waste that's being generated from these facilities.
Yeah, that's interesting. My last guest was talking about the corn biz in America
Mm.
and was describing, I forget the exact number, but I think it was something like, because of all this hodgepodge of incentives that you referenced that came into place over the post-war era, let's call it.
Yeah.
40% of the American corn crop is being used for biofuels. And so if you like take a step back and say, well, why isn't that being used for food? I guess the answer is because it's they make more money turning it into biofuels. But in a non like globally connected supply chain, what would happen to that corn? It would just get wasted.
That's part of the problem, is we've created this subsidized uh, system where a lot of the farms have been converted to corn, soy, a lot of the staple crops that are used for, whether it be ethanol or certain products, that it's hard to convert back. And so how do we kind of decentralize and incentivize the food production and acreage for food production? And we've balanced that with importing and other things, different foods, and large kind of monoculture. So how do we build these diversified? It's hard. It's kind of like reworking and re-breaking the system a little bit to start to manage that. But that's why, and I'd be interested kind of to listen on what that farmer from Iowa said on like how that's impacting, because I've worked with a lot of dairy farmers, um, just based on where I grew up and people that I've worked with in the past on. That's similar. It's like they're very controlled on price of milk and what the end use of that and the supply and demand versus controlling kind of their own destiny. And we're seeing that, across the country with corn and other products as well. But yeah, if there's not an end market or a use, they're being subsidized if that stuff goes to waste in some way. And that's creating that reassurance for them and the incentive to be able to do that because they know there's a stable revenue stream to kind of keep it going versus the uncertainty of, some of the other more nuanced products.
Yeah. Such a complicated problem. The
Yeah.
one follow up I forgot to ask this on the model, the Divert business model. If
Mhm.
you're taking like a typical grocery store that's signed up for the program, are you paying them for the food stuff or are they just donating it?
No, so the way that our model works is we have kind of a subscription where a fee where in terms of we're collecting data, information, offering for the program to be able to incentivize and drive reduction over time.
Yep.
And also a fee to manage and process that unsold food. So today it is a cost to retailers or any food business to whether you're sending it to the landfill or sending it to a beneficial use, it costs to do that. And so when we look at the ROI of our facilities, our goal is to stabilize and reduce costs for the customer because we have a more sustainable model that's less fluctuation to market conditions and whatnot. So we're really focused on that. And then over time, are there incentives, and carbon credits that we can capture because we're doing something more environmentally friendly with the unsold food? But today it is a cost to be able to process and manage unsold food. But when we look at the ROI for the retailer, reduction, a grocer does about 3 to 5% profit margin, and that is equivalent to what they waste and shrink perishable food. So for every percentage that we help them reduce, it goes straight to their bottom line, and
Yep.
that's really how we're helping them think about it. That's not just another hauler or a collection company that's coming and moving it from one bucket to another bucket, like a better bucket. We're helping them reduce that bucket over time.
That's the goal, right? Like, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
And the grocery stores, they have to pay a landfill fee. And the idea behind the power side of your business is that they can pay maybe a slightly lower fee, and at least it's going into the circular economy. And
Yeah,
they get this data advantage over time.
exactly.
Yeah.
And labor productivity. So we're able to standardize across their whole footprint. So they're able to not have to depackage every single product. There's a number of kind of benefits that we're able to provide. And landfill rates are continuing to go up. We look at them year over year, especially with the diminishing capacity and some of these regulatory factors. Um, it's not getting cheaper to dispose of waste.
Yeah. Uh, so interesting. So you mentioned a little bit about your background in the milk biz. And my question, I guess, to start this part of the conversation is, how did you come to be involved in this work? What steps in life led you from from milk farms to doing this?
A little bit of a windy road, but I think that's probably true for all of us in some sense. And I grew up in Wisconsin and around a lot of dairy farms and just became kind of enamored with how we grow and produce food, and more of just from a passion. And I loved cooking and still do, and really food was a passion. But didn't go focus on that in college or anything. Kind of went in and got a degree in chemical and environmental engineering, but that was really more on looking at complex problems and being able to break them down and start to build solutions for world problems. And obviously that's very like philosophical, but really I kept going back to being involved in certain aspects, whether it be community-based food systems, and really starting to figure out how do we, get make sure there's access to food for people in need. When I was living in Pittsburgh, and I've done some stuff in Boston and other cities to kind of look at that. And yeah, I've just always really been around food and restaurants and people that have been working on that kind of stuff. So kind of married the two together when I came to Divert, and been here, for a little over 8 years now. And it's really bringing in that, problem solving and environmental impact with our food system. And so it's been a great journey, and really marrying those two passions together has really been, meaningful and purposeful for me.
Yeah, that's cool. In the milk farms, did you work as like a farmhand on that as a young person?
Yeah, I mean, the short story is I would very early on would ride my bike over to like a nearby farm before school, and parents didn't even know I was doing that. And eventually, the teacher I think called home or something to say I was coming in late. But I was, working on a farmhand when I was like 9 years old, on a local farm, and just loved doing it. And then eventually started doing it, with my parents knowing, and over time.
Like
And really
you actually got paid for it instead of like the yeah.
just volunteer. Um, yeah, and then I was funny, like kind of moved to Vermont out of college, and started working on some dairy farms with renewable energy. So they were looking for alternative revenue sources, as milk and cheese and whey, and the price of that was varying. So was actually incorporate. That was my first kind of incorporating and turning food waste. So bringing food waste from different businesses, and turning that into renewable energy, combined with the cow manure. And so now they were generating renewable electricity and getting a revenue source and credits from that. So that was 12 years ago that we were doing that in New England, which had some of the first co-digestion on-farm digesters. And then that was really, I had exposure to the food waste problem and crisis well before that, just seeing it firsthand in a lot of different instances. But that was where I was like, okay, we can actually solve this at scale. And Divert, Ryan and I spoke, and I was like, this company's all in. Like, this is their business model, and I want to be a part of it. And yeah, it's been a good journey, and we're making moves.
Yeah, it seems like an incredible vision, incredible company. What is the I know you mentioned the 30 facilities, but what's the current thinking at Divert? Like what's the goal? Are you trying to get the number of wasted food down to a certain percentage, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, the reality is, even with our 30 facilities, that's about 5% of the wasted food. So it's going to require collaboration and a collection of and a suite of solutions. Now, what I think we're doing is really at the forefront of that, and propelling that, and showing that there is a business model for it. Um, there's been a lot, historically, of kind of the field of dreams, where build it and hopefully it'll come. And the reality is, you have to marry that commercial aspect that I was talking about, and the customer, with the problem, or else it's really hard to connect the two, and it's not going to happen on its own. So we've really built an end-to-end vertically integrated solution that allows us to have longevity and build these facilities. So that's kind of the goal, is to set up the infrastructure and the model to reduce over time, and really with businesses that have that type of complex food supply chain. So a lot of those consumer facing businesses, food manufacturing, grocery, and then from there's opportunity to scale and expand on how we serve our communities in other ways. And you and I at home, and how we kind of start to reduce the waste on that front as well. But it'll take more than just Divert to solve this problem.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. Could somebody like a Starbucks or McDonald's be a client? Or is there stuff too processed to get to
100%. I think that's a lot of our grocery customers have Starbucks and other types of Pizza Hut, whatever it may be, within their grocery. You've
Right.
Targets and whatnot. So we work with a lot of those already. And that's really kind of these layers that we look at from a market of, okay, retail grocery. There's a lot of it across the U.S. and it's very standardized, and we know how to work with those customers very in depth. I mean, we've been doing it for almost 2 decades, and now really focus on food manufacturing and producers that supply those, as well as those food service and restaurant type businesses. And how do we start to marry all of those together to build this network? And it looks different for each market as well. Atlanta is different than Washington, which is different from North Carolina and Texas. So really, when we look at those facilities, we're being very intelligent about it and how do we approach those. Turlock, California was the first one. Northern California came online this year, and we've got or last year, and we've got Washington and North Carolina, Washington State, ready to go, coming online later this year. So really taking a very market-driven, intelligent approach to how we solve for the food waste problem in those different areas.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of some stuff I heard here in LA. It strikes me that LA is probably very different than like a suburban market. I've done a lot of work on the homelessness crisis here, and learned that like a lot of the local grocery stores actually are already feeding like the homeless population from this exact same supply. So I'm wondering if you've done the math, like is the waste percentage in a place like LA actually less because of the geographic concentration and the ease with which you could take food that is still usable and get it into hands of the food insecure? Is it a less percentage than if you were in like a suburban or rural part of the country?
Hard to say. I wouldn't think so, to be honest. I think, all of our facilities are going to be located within that kind of density metropolitan areas, these kind of densely populated that will serve. We have the ability to serve groceries in suburban rural areas through our logistics network and how we manage that through reverse logistics. But yeah, there is a bigger network of alternative solutions or collaborations, whether it be, you have your big network of Feeding America, and then, the different localized pickup options. I think there's a lot more flexibility in those areas. And so grocers are doing a really good job of accessing that network and trying to optimize their donations and their recovery efforts. So we are seeing that, in certain markets, there's already kind of a more established, mature network of food donations.
Hmm.
But the reality is the wasted food that goes to landfill is still such a big part. And so we really need to create the infrastructure and solutions to solve for that. And then the optimizing to donations just becomes a little bit easier in markets where that's already mature.
Yeah.
So to your point, yes, I think like LA has a very strong culture of serving its community. And so we see that as well. I mean, we're all throughout California, and we see a strong, donation culture, strong like environmental consciousness as well. But at the end of the day, if there's not a easy solution that you can integrate into, let's say a grocery day to day, it's probably not going to happen. So that's where we can come in and really help and enhance those existing programs that are already in place. And that's the key, is like, we're not here to replace donations. Where our program actually enhances them. And a lot of our grocery partners have seen 10 to 30% increase in their donations by working with us, because they have more visibility in terms of what's going unsold.
That's a huge success story.
Yeah.
What I love about this whole story really is like when you think about the critique of capitalism and you look at an issue like the food insecurity crisis in America, or it's even worse, throughout the world, right? There's places where there are like millions of people who are starving, at this moment in time. And it's easy to just say like, oh, business is evil. That's why we got here. But what the Divert story shows is that business can be applied intelligently to do what wouldn't be done otherwise. Like if the attempts by these cities, like my city, to try to do some good on the food waste, they're not going to have near the impact that a properly structured business, because the incentive isn't there. Like Divert has the incentive, the grocery stores have the incentive, and the food retailers as well, the restaurants and stuff. Where like the average citizen, approaching the trash can at the Shake Shack and deciding where to throw the trash, there's just, unless you're really devoted, you might miss out. You might throw your French fries in the wrong bin, because you're not as motivated as a business who's got investors and banks and employees and bills to pay. And so I love the story, and I can't wait to see what you all do. It sounds like you're well on your way to scaling, and excited to keep track of it. Thank you so much for your time, and really enjoy getting to know you.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. This was a great opportunity, and hopefully we'll catch up soon as we get closer to those 30 facilities and see where we're at on the impact.
Yeah, like how about we do this? When you guys are gonna open something in SoCal, I'm gonna come see it.
100%.
I would love to we could do an episode like that. Like, let's take a look at how this works in practice. That'd be fun.
Definitely.
Well, Ben, thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Nick.